The line at gate E17 moved the way time does on travel days. Slow, predictable, forgettable. Shoes tapped lightly against the floor, boarding passes rustled, a few polite laughs broke between strangers. Everything was normal until it wasn't. At first, it was the sound of a pause, small but heavy enough to break the rhythm. The gate agent's hand lifted, palm out, stopping the woman next in line. No smile, no explanation. Just a firm, practiced voice that didn't invite questions. "First-class boarding only, ma'am." She said it like a verdict, not a sentence. The woman she stopped was Dr. Leona Harris, 41, composed, confident, her navy suit pressed to perfection. In her left hand, she held a leather carry-on. In her right, a first-class ticket for seat 2A, paid in full. Confirmed twice by her assistant before she even left her Los Angeles office that morning. The man behind her shifted impatiently. Someone sighed. Another whispered something about people not knowing how boarding groups worked. Leona didn't move, she just blinked once. Calm, controlled. The agent didn't glance down to verify the ticket. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything her mouth didn't. Leona spoke softly, her voice clear enough for those nearby to hear. "I am in first class." The agent's lips pressed tighter. "Step aside, please." The command landed sharp, slicing the air around them. People glanced up from their phones. The couple near the window stopped chatting. A teenage boy lowered his headphones. The quiet turned strange, heavy. Leona extended her boarding pass again. Her hand didn't shake, but the silence around her did. "You can scan it." The agent didn't move. Her jaw tensed. Her colleague, a younger woman standing beside the boarding lane, exchanged a look with her. The kind of look that said, "We know what this is, but we won't say it out loud." Then came the second order, louder now. "Step aside, ma'am." This time the man behind Leona muttered, "Just follow instructions." A few chuckles followed, not loud but cruel enough to cut. Someone pulled out a phone, not to record, not yet, just in case something worth filming happened. Leona's chest rose slowly. Every instinct in her body told her to speak, to demand the respect her title commanded, but she didn't. Not here. Not like this, because she knew that tone. The one that says you don't belong. The one that disguises prejudice as policy. Her mind flicked back to her father's old words. When they try to shrink you, stand taller, but don't shout. Power never needs volume. So she straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and spoke again, evenly. "Check your system." The agent didn't. Instead, she waved over security, and that was the moment everything shifted. Two uniformed guards approached, steps measured, expressions unreadable. Passengers began whispering now. Someone murmured, "Is she causing a scene?" Another muttered, "There's always one." The guard stopped in front of her. One spoke mechanically, "Ma'am, please step aside and come with us." Leona's lips parted in disbelief. "For what reason?" "Please, ma'am," the guard repeated. The words echoed differently this time, not a request, but a warning. Leona's boarding pass remained in her hand, her name in bold print. But no one looked. Not the agents. Not the guards. Not the passengers pretending not to stare. She exhaled slowly. Every camera lens, every judgmental glance, every hidden smirk from the crowd pressed in on her like a weight. They didn't see a woman who built an empire from nothing. They saw something else entirely. And as the guards reached for her arm, the paper slipped slightly in her grip, a single line of ink flashing before it folded. Seat 2A, first class. But in that moment, no one cared what was printed on the ticket. They only cared about who was holding it. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, where we tell stories that make silence uncomfortable and truth unforgettable. Drop your country in the comments. We love seeing where our community is watching from. The guards motioned again, firmer this time. Leona didn't resist. She adjusted her blazer, straightened her back, and walked toward the terminal exit, not escorted but erased. Behind her, the gate returned to motion, as if nothing had happened. The next passenger scanned their pass. The conveyor of indifference rolled on, and the world pretended not to notice. But somewhere, deep in that quiet airport, a decision was about to be made. One that would cost a global airline $9 billion. The walk from the gate to the holding area couldn't have been more than 100 feet, yet it stretched like a lifetime measured in humiliation. Each step echoed against polished tiles that gleamed so bright, Leona could see her reflection looking back at her. half rage, half restraint. The guards walked slightly ahead of her, not touching, but close enough to make the message clear. You're not welcome here. Behind her, the murmurs grew into something worse. Silence followed by the faint click of phone cameras. Someone whispered, "She must have done something." Another voice replied, "They wouldn't remove her for no reason." No reason. That phrase repeated itself in her mind until it felt like a bruise. Her boarding pass, still clutched in her hand, was now creased from the pressure of her grip. Seat 2A, first class. Priority Platinum tier member. The words felt meaningless now. She had flown with this airline for years. Her company's name was on their partnership board. Her loyalty was supposed to mean something, but none of that mattered when the wrong skin color stepped into the right seat. Leona's breath stayed even, controlled. That control wasn't calmness, it was survival. She knew the danger of losing composure, how easily executive could turn into aggressive, how quickly dignity could be misread as defiance. She'd seen it happen to friends, colleagues, even strangers in grocery aisles. The unwritten rule was simple. Don't give them the reaction they're waiting for. The terminal buzzed around her with a strange, guilty energy. Travelers tried to look away but couldn't. One man lowered his phone the moment she met his eyes, suddenly ashamed. Another woman, standing near the window, mouthed, "I'm sorry," but didn't move a step to help. Leona didn't blame them. She just felt the weight of it, the collective cowardice of a crowd that always chooses comfort over courage. The guard leading the way opened a side door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly, colder than the terminal. A bland coffee machine stood in the corner, half-empty cups scattered on a desk. The room smelled of paper, disinfectant, and pretense. One of the guards gestured toward a plastic chair. "Please wait here while we clarify the issue." Leona took her seat without speaking. She didn't trust her voice not to tremble. Not from fear but fury. Minutes passed, then 20, then 40. No one came back. She took out her phone, opened her calendar. Her next meeting in New York. Final contract signing, Ether Dynamics, ex-Hallstrom Airlines, 8 a.m. sharp. Her flight had been scheduled precisely so she'd arrive the night before, refreshed and ready to present. Every second wasted here tightened a knot in her chest. She scrolled through her notes, graphs, forecasts, the sustainability proposal she'd spent months refining, a deal projected to change aviation logistics forever. Now, all she could think about was the look on that gate agent's face, that quiet, certain dismissal. The door creaked open. A woman in a Navy uniform entered, smiling a smile trained for damage control. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Leona raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding that required security?" The woman hesitated. "Our staff didn't realize you were a first-class passenger." "I showed my ticket." "I understand, ma'am, but the gate was under pressure and the agents—" Leona cut in, her tone even, unyielding. "Pressure doesn't erase prejudice." The woman's smile faltered. "We'd like to offer you a compensation voucher for the inconvenience." Leona looked down at the paper the woman slid across the table. $200, the price of being doubted. She didn't touch it. "Keep it." "Ma'am, we're just trying to make this right." Leona finally met her eyes. "You can't make right what you refuse to see." The woman nodded stiffly, mumbled another apology, and left. The silence afterward was deafening. Leona stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. For the first time in years, she felt the old sting, the one she thought she had outrun when she built her empire from scratch. It wasn't just the embarrassment. It was the reminder that no title, no income, no prestige could fully armor her against the small-mindedness she faced today. Her mind went quiet, calculating, not revenge, but response. She had no intention of explaining herself to anyone here. She would speak where it mattered, in contracts, in boardrooms, in consequences. Then the vibration. A single buzz from her phone broke the stillness. A message from Taylor, her assistant. "Board's already in New York." Her eyes lingered on the screen. They didn't know she wasn't on the flight. They didn't know she'd been dragged from a gate by her own business partner's airline. Leona stood up slowly, adjusted her blazer, and slipped the crumpled boarding pass into her pocket like a warning label. The guards watched quietly as she walked past them, her heels steady against the floor. The next steps she took wouldn't be toward an airplane. They would be toward a reckoning, and by the time she was done, no one in that terminal would ever forget the name Dr. Leona Harris. The room smelled like old coffee and stale excuses. A half-empty mug sat on the table, its surface film now hardened into a thin crust. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence that no one dared to break. Across from Leona, a muted television played weather reports for cities she didn't care about. Everything in that room existed to keep people quiet. Lukewarm air, gray walls, gray faces, gray tone. She had been sitting there for almost an hour. No one explained anything. No one asked if she needed water. A few employees passed through, glancing her way, whispering under their breath before disappearing again. It wasn't curiosity. It was avoidance. The door finally opened. A man in a tailored navy vest and name badge that read Supervisor C. Denton entered, clutching a folder he never opened. His smile was shallow and his posture stiff, the kind of posture people wear when they think empathy might get them in trouble. "Miss Harris," he began, his tone dipping somewhere between polite and practiced. "We're deeply sorry for the misunderstanding earlier at the gate." He didn't look her in the eyes when he said it. His gaze hovered somewhere near her shoulder, as if real contact would make the apology too personal to manage. Leona crossed one leg over the other, her voice calm but sharp. A misunderstanding would mean someone checked and got it wrong. No one checked. Denton nodded quickly. "Yes, well, our staff followed procedure, but it seems there was confusion about the boarding group." Leona leaned back. "Do you often drag passengers out of line when there's confusion?" He flinched slightly, then recovered. "We never want our customers to feel disrespected. Ned, we understand how upsetting this must have been." Upsetting. That word again, small enough to minimize, soft enough to deflect. Leona let out a slow breath. "You understand how upsetting this was?" She repeated, almost whispering. "Then tell me, how many people in first class have you escorted out today?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the floor tiles, gleaming, spotless, reflecting a world that pretended to be fair. She studied him for a moment. Same company logo, same uniform, same tone she had heard in boardrooms her entire career, when men twice her age pretended not to notice the only black woman in the room until her name appeared on the financial report. He shuffled his papers, pretending to find something important. "We'd like to extend a gesture of goodwill." He pulled out a printed sheet. "A travel voucher for $200. Leona smiled faintly, not from humor, but disbelief. $200, that's what you think dignity costs? Ma'am, it's standard protocol for—" She held up her hand. "Protocol got me here. Don't hide behind it again." Denton swallowed, unsure whether to apologize again or stay silent. In the end, he did neither. Leona took the voucher from his hand, folded it neatly in half, then again, smaller and smaller, until it was just a crumpled square between her fingers. Then she dropped it into the trash bin beside her chair without a word. Denton stood frozen, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Miss Harris, we truly regret the situation." She met his eyes for the first time, steady, unflinching. "No, you regret who I turned out to be." He blinked, confused. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. As the door closed behind him, the quiet returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was charged now, like a storm forming behind glass. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and stared at the home screen for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over a contact labeled, "Chairman, Hallstrom Airlines." Her reflection shimmered faintly on the black screen, half in shadow, half in light. For a fleeting second, her mind drifted back to Detroit. The sound of wrenches in her father's hands, the grit under his fingernails, the soft rhythm of his humming as he repaired engines in their garage. Her mother marking essays at the kitchen table, red pen tapping with quiet focus. They hadn't raised her to shout for fairness. They raised her to be the proof of it. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Dignity is the only thing you should never negotiate." She straightened her blazer, took one final look at the folded voucher in the bin, then pressed call. The dial tone buzzed 3 times before connecting. Somewhere in a glass tower thousands of miles away, a man's cheerful voice answered, "Leona, ready for tomorrow's big signing?" Her lips barely moved as she spoke. Not anymore. The room went still again, but this time it was the calm before an empire cracked. The call connected on the 3rd ring. The chairman's voice came through bright and unguarded, full of the smooth confidence only a man certain of good news could carry. "Leona, just the woman I wanted to hear from," he said warmly. "I trust your flight went well? Everything ready for the signing tomorrow?" For a moment she said nothing. The silence stretched, clean and surgical. It was the kind of silence that demanded to be filled, and he did, nervously. "Leona?" Her tone when it came was soft but precise. "I didn't make the flight." He chuckled lightly, oblivious. "Oh, don't tell me there was a delay. Airports are a nightmare lately." She didn't match his laugh. "No delay," she replied. "I was removed from the gate." The words landed like dropped glass. He went still. There was a tiny click in the background. Maybe he'd turned off speakerphone. Maybe he'd straightened up in his seat. His next sentence came quieter, careful. "Removed? What do you mean removed?" Leona's voice didn't rise. She recounted it like reading a report. Clean, factual, unembellished. How the gate agent stopped her before even scanning her ticket. How security was summoned. How no one verified her seat or her status. How she was escorted away. Not because of behavior, but because of perception. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. The truth had its own gravity. When she finished, he exhaled through the phone. "Leona, that's outrageous. I'm sure this was a misunderstanding. I'll have their team look into it immediately." Her next line came so quietly he had to stop speaking to hear it. "If this is how your airline treats a black woman in first class, imagine your economy cabin." Silence. Not a pause. Silence. Heavy, unfixable silence. He tried again, fumbling for control. "Leona, please, you know that's not who we are as a company. I've worked hard to build an inclusive culture here. This was one incident, one employee." "An employee you trained," she interrupted. "A system you built. A culture you designed." Her calm didn't sound forgiving, it sounded final. He stammered. "We can fix this. I'll fly down personally. We'll issue an apology, retrain the staff, donate to whatever organization you suggest." Leona cut him off again, her voice still level. "Do you hear yourself?" He stopped. "You think my dignity has a price tag attached to it. You think throwing money at guilt turns it into virtue. It doesn't." He started to protest, but she continued. "When I met with your board 3 weeks ago, you praised my company for our ethics, for our transparency. You said Aether Dynamics was the kind of partner you needed to modernize your brand." Her tone sharpened, not from anger, but clarity. "Now you've shown me what your brand really is." He said her name again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Leona, please, don't do this. You're hours away from signing a deal that could change both our companies." Her eyes flicked to the discarded voucher still lying in the bin beside her chair. "It already has." For the first time, his voice lost its polish. "You're not being reasonable." Leona closed her eyes briefly, remembering the crowd at the gate, their silence, their stares, the way even her education, her title, her success couldn't shield her. She spoke again, steady as breath. "You're right. I'm not being reasonable. I'm being just." The line crackled faintly. He didn't know what to say. She had no interest in helping him find the words. Leona had learned long ago that real power didn't come from raising your voice. It came from the silence that follows truth. The kind that makes other people hear themselves for the first time. "I built Aether Dynamics on values your airline just violated in public," she said finally. "We don't stay where respect is optional." "Leona, let's meet." "No." She let the words sit between them until it no longer needed explanation. Then, clearly, quietly, "We're withdrawing our participation effective immediately." There was a gasp on the other end, followed by the hollow sound of disbelief. He tried to respond, but she had already ended the call. The phone screen dimmed back to black, her reflection faint on the glass. Her heartbeat slowed, not from relief, but from certainty. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was what they expected. She was resolute, and in that quiet, she realized something. The most dangerous sound in any empire isn't shouting. It's silence, right before everything collapses. By sunrise, the quiet decision made in that bland airport lounge had grown teeth. What began as a single phone call between two executives became the pulse of an entire industry by morning. The first ripple hit Hallstrom Airlines executive inboxes before dawn. Hundreds of emails flooded in, from legal, public relations, finance, and partners, all carrying the same two-word subject line: urgent matter. In the legal department, junior attorneys scrolled through the partnership termination letter 3 times, unable to believe what they were reading. The digital signature was unmistakable. Dr. Leona Harris, CEO, Ether Dynamics. The ink was dry. The $9 billion merger that had been projected to boost Hallstrom's stock by nearly 17% was gone overnight. By 7 a.m., the company's headquarters in Chicago had turned into a hive of controlled panic. Executives poured into conference rooms clutching half-empty coffee cups and crisis folders. Screens flickered with real-time market updates, and somewhere between the numbers, fear began to settle in. A senior analyst muttered, "She actually pulled the deal?" The VP of Operations confirmed grimly. She did. The document came in at 5:13 a.m. Legal says it's airtight. In another corner of the same building, the PR department scrambled to draft a statement, something polished enough to sound sincere but vague enough to avoid legal liability. The first draft began with, "We regret the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred with one of our passengers." Someone interrupted mid-sentence. "Passenger? She's the CEO of our tech partner." The room went silent. A younger PR officer whispered what everyone was thinking. "We dragged our dealmaker out of our own gate." That line made its way into the internal memo later that morning, word for word. Meanwhile, at Ether Dynamics headquarters in San Francisco, the story was spreading like wildfire, though not because Leona said a single thing. She hadn't released a statement, posted online, or even returned journalists' calls. Her silence was louder than any press release. At 8:30 a.m., Bloomberg's morning segment led with a headline that made executives' blood run cold. Hallstrom-Ether merger in jeopardy following racial profiling incident at LAX. By mid-morning, the company's shares had dipped 3 points, then 6. By noon, investors were calling emergency meetings. The public relations team tried to contain the narrative, but every attempt sounded worse than the last. "We can't call it profiling," one manager insisted. "That implies intent." "Then what do we call it?" another asked. "Coincidence? While she was holding a first-class ticket?" The CEO of Hallstrom Airlines arrived 2 hours late to the boardroom, red-eyed, phone pressed to his ear. "Damage control," he barked to his assistant. "Get me the chairman. Get me anyone who knows her personally. We're fixing this before markets close." But it was too late. By then, screenshots of the internal memo had leaked online. Social media erupted. Employees, customers, and journalists all demanded answers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Only a week earlier, Hallstrom had launched an ad campaign celebrating inclusive innovation in the skies. Their slogan, "Everyone belongs above the clouds," was now being quoted mockingly beneath every news article. The stock continued to fall. Investor trust eroded with each refresh of the ticker. Analysts began predicting long-term brand damage. The merger had been more than a contract. It was supposed to be their technological lifeline, a partnership that would have modernized their aging systems and restored industry confidence. Without Ether Dynamics, that future vanished. In the boardroom, one executive slammed his laptop shut. "How did this happen?" he demanded. "How did no one recognize her?" Another executive, quieter, older, spoke without looking up. "They didn't need to recognize her name," he said. "They recognized her skin." No one argued. Across the country, journalists pieced together fragments of the story. An anonymous staff member at LAX confirmed that security had been called without cause. Another leaked detail about the holding room and the $200 voucher. Every quote, every image, every whisper layered another bruise onto the company's reputation. The chairman himself stayed silent for most of the day. His calls to Leona went unanswered. He issued a short internal message to employees that read, "We are reviewing the situation and taking immediate steps to ensure fairness and accountability." But even that sounded hollow, especially when paired with news footage of a confident black woman walking out of the terminal with quiet defiance. The footage had gone viral by evening. Not a close-up, not dramatic, just her walking through the airport with her chin high and her phone in hand. No press, no entourage, just composure. And that image hurt them more than any lawsuit could. While Hallstrom executives scrambled to rewrite apologies and policy statements, Leona didn't need to say a single word. Her decision had already rewritten the rules. The industry watched closely. Other airlines convened private meetings, re-examining their diversity policies, their customer training, their PR manuals. No one wanted to be the next Hallstrom. By midnight, the fallout had a name inside every corporate circle: the Leona effect. And in the days to come, it would redefine not just how airlines treated passengers, but how corporations measured integrity itself. They had built their empire on air. Leona just changed its pressure. Before the boardrooms, before the headlines, before the day she stood in line at gate E17, there was a girl who used to sit on a cracked stool inside a small garage in Detroit, watching her father rebuild engines with nothing but grit and patience. The air always smelled of oil and possibility. Her father, Eugene Harris, wasn't a man of many words. He didn't preach ambition, he lived it. His hands were always stained with work, his voice calm even when bolts refused to turn. Whenever something broke, he'd mutter, "Everything can run again, you just have to understand its rhythm." Her mother, Denise, balanced 2 jobs, public school teacher by day, night instructor by necessity. She came home with red ink on her fingers, always marking essays, always believing education could rewrite circumstance. On most nights, Leona fell asleep to the sound of her mother's pen scratching across paper and her father's tools clinking softly in the garage. That house didn't have much, but it had rhythm, one built on endurance. By the time she was 10, Leona was already pulling apart radios and rewiring her father's old car batteries, curious about how things worked. "You've got your mama's mind and my stubbornness," her father would say, wiping grease from his palms. "That's a dangerous mix." Her first real sting of bias came years later, at MIT. She had earned her scholarship through sheer brilliance. Top of her class, recommendations glowing. But in her sophomore year, she designed an energy module for a group project that her lab partner later presented as his own. When she confronted him, he smiled and said, "You're good at building, Leona. Not everyone's built to lead." She didn't argue, she just worked harder. And when the project went public, she quietly published her research independently, under her name alone. Within a month, her findings had been cited by 3 professors, and his name was forgotten in footnotes. That was the first time she learned that silence could humiliate louder than shouting ever could. After graduation, she entered the tech world with a resume that should have opened doors, but it didn't. Interviewers smiled too wide, asked if she was there for administrative roles, or complimented her articulate answers as though English were a surprise. Her qualifications were questioned before her ideas were. So she stopped waiting for validation. In her late 20s, she turned her small Detroit apartment into a workshop again. A mirror of her father's garage. The paint peeled, the walls hummed with cold, and her first prototype barely functioned. But that garage held something powerful: ownership. Every setback, every rejection, became blueprints for her next version. The company she built from that cramped space would later become Ether Dynamics, a name she chose deliberately, because air is invisible, but essential. "We're not seen until we're needed," she'd often tell her team. Her big break came at 33. A Fortune 500 logistics firm implemented one of her early designs, a predictive algorithm that optimized flight scheduling and saved millions. Overnight, her reputation shifted. The same executives who once doubted her were suddenly requesting meetings, speaking her name with awe. By 36, Forbes listed her among the top 100 innovators in America. By 41, she was leading an empire built on clean tech and smart infrastructure. But she never forgot where she came from, or how it felt to be underestimated. Every insult, every dismissal, every forced smile in a room that doubted her worth. She turned all of it into architecture. Her success wasn't just built on intellect. It was built on rejection, recycled into progress. Leona often said success was her protest, not the loud kind, but the enduring kind. The kind that outlasts mockery and makes history rewrite its tone. So when she stood in that airport, her ticket valid and her posture calm, the world saw a black woman who didn't belong in first class. What they failed to see was everything behind that calm. The Detroit nights when her father's hands guided hers, the classrooms where her mother whispered, "You're more than they think." The late hours soldering circuits with the hum of an old radiator keeping her company. They didn't drag a passenger that day. They dragged the daughter of a mechanic and a teacher. They dragged the mind that had redefined predictive systems across global aviation. They dragged the weight of everything she had survived, everything she had built, everything she had learned to turn into strength. And though she walked away quietly, her silence carried decades of thunder. So when the airline dragged her, they weren't pulling a woman, they were pulling the weight of everything she'd survived. The story didn't break through press releases or corporate leaks. It started with a shaky cell phone video, 42 seconds long, posted by a passenger who couldn't believe what they were seeing. The caption read, "They dragged this woman out of first class for no reason." Within hours, that clip had circled the globe. It hit Reddit first, then X, then TikTok, where users slowed it down frame by frame, analyzing every glance, every gesture. Her composure under humiliation became the image people couldn't stop replaying. By midnight, the hashtag #dragged while CEO was trending across every platform. But no one knew she was a CEO yet. At first, she was just the black woman in the Navy suit. People debated what might have happened, speculated about policy, argued over who was at fault. Then someone posted a clearer photo, and the internet noticed her bag, a custom leather briefcase embossed with a subtle logo, Ether Dynamics. That's when the tone changed. Screenshots flooded timelines. Corporate employees began whispering in comment sections. Within hours, someone linked her public company profile. Dr. Leona Harris, CEO and founder. The realization hit like a storm. The woman dragged out of a gate for boarding confusion was the same woman Hallstrom Airlines had been bragging about partnering with for months. By dawn, #dragged while CEO wasn't just a hashtag, it was a movement. Thousands of users posted stories of their own humiliations while traveling, while shopping, while simply existing. People shared photos of the airline's old ads about inclusion and equality, now captioned with biting irony. One read, "Everyone belongs above the clouds, except her." The company's PR department released its first statement just before sunrise. It was a standard crisis template. "We regret the unfortunate incident that occurred at Los Angeles International Airport involving a valued customer. Hallstrom Airlines remains committed to providing inclusive service and has launched a full investigation." It didn't help. The tone was corporate, cold, and hollow. "Valued customer" sounded worse than silence. People flooded the comments. "Say her name." "She's not just a customer." "Commitment means nothing without consequence." By mid-morning, investors were calling emergency meetings. Hallstrom stock had already dipped another 4 points. Analysts on CNBC called it a reputational disaster. One shareholder wrote publicly, "We just lost a $9 billion deal because someone couldn't see past their bias." Inside the airline's headquarters, panic spread faster than the headlines. Executives argued over whether to suspend the gate agents, whether to reach out to Leona directly, whether to issue another apology. One senior advisor muttered what others wouldn't say out loud. "We didn't just mishandle a passenger, we mishandled power." Hours later, the airline CEO finally appeared in front of cameras. His apology was crisp, practiced, and perfectly meaningless. "We deeply regret what occurred and are working to ensure this never happens again. Diversity and inclusion are at the heart of our values here at Hallstrom Airlines." He smiled tightly, then exited before reporters could ask questions. The clip was replayed endlessly, but not for the reasons he intended. Viewers pointed out his smirk, his scripted tone, the way he never once said her name. One journalist summed it up best: "Apologies without accountability are just PR-scented air." Meanwhile, Leona Harris said nothing. No press conference, no social media posts, no interviews, just silence. That silence drove them mad. Reporters waited outside her San Francisco office, hoping for a quote. TV anchors speculated about her next move. Industry insiders whispered that her quiet was strategic, that she was preparing lawsuits or plotting a new partnership with a rival airline. But those who knew her understood it differently. Leona didn't speak because she didn't need to. Her decision had already spoken for her. Every missed call from Hallstrom's boardroom was an unanswered plea for dignity, too late to reclaim. Every news cycle replayed not her words, but her restraint. By nightfall, a journalist from The Atlantic wrote an op-ed titled, "The Woman Who Said Nothing and Changed Everything." And beneath that headline, millions nodded silently. because in a world addicted to noise, her quiet had become the loudest truth of all. The morning after the media storm, Ether Dynamics' inbox was on fire. Dozens of partnership inquiries, joint venture proposals, and sudden invitations filled the company's servers like sparks in a dry forest. Airline executives who'd once ignored Leona's emails were now scrambling to arrange meetings. One European carrier wrote, "We've admired Ether's vision for years. Perhaps this incident opens new opportunities for collaboration." A rival U.S. airline sent flowers to her office with a note that read, "Respect flies higher than reputation." It was signed by their CEO. The irony wasn't lost on her. Leona sat in her office, the same one where she'd once built prototypes surrounded by wires and second-hand monitors. Now the space buzzed with quiet tension. Her assistant, Taylor, hovered nearby, scrolling through messages. "Another offer," Taylor said softly. "Pacific Aero wants to meet this week, and Skypath says they can match Hallstrom's contract value, maybe exceed it." Leona didn't look up from her laptop. "Tell them to wait." Taylor hesitated. "All of them?" "All of them." There was something unsettling in her calm, too deliberate, too quiet. The kind of calm that came after surviving humiliation and realizing that silence had turned into leverage. Not everyone at Ether saw it that way. By mid-afternoon, the board convened an emergency meeting via video call. Faces filled the screen. Shareholders, CFOs, analysts, all wearing the same anxious expression. "Dr. Harris," one of them began, "let's be realistic. The merger's collapse caused short-term instability. Our expansion plans depended on that deal. Was your decision perhaps too abrupt?" Leona raised her eyes slowly. "Abrupt?" "We understand your frustration," another board member added, "but pulling out entirely without negotiation seems impulsive. Maybe there's still a path to repair the relationship." Leona leaned back, fingers steepled. "Repair what exactly? The part where they dragged your CEO out of her own partnership gate?" The silence that followed was thick and defensive. "Business isn't about emotion," one man said carefully. "It's about sustainability." Leona's voice stayed even. "And what sustains business, if not principle?" No one answered. She closed her laptop gently. "If ethics feel expensive," she said, "you've already lost value." The call ended not with applause, but with quiet resignation. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't argue with her logic. After the meeting, the office felt heavier. Taylor entered cautiously, holding a cup of tea she hadn't been asked for. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion. "I couldn't sleep last night," Taylor confessed, setting the cup down. "I keep replaying it, watching them pull you away, and I just stood there. I didn't say a word." Leona looked up, her tone softening. "You don't owe me guilt, Taylor." "I should have done something," Taylor insisted, voice trembling. "I should have told them who you were. I just froze." Leona stood, walking around the desk to face her. "Do you think knowing my title would have changed how they saw me?" Taylor swallowed hard. "Maybe not, but at least they would have been afraid to touch you." Leona smiled faintly. "I don't want fear to protect me. I want respect to be the standard." The young assistant broke down then, quietly wiping tears she tried to hide. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." "No one does," Leona said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You can't fix what they refuse to see. All you can do is make sure you never stand silent again when you see it happen to someone else." Taylor nodded, her voice barely audible. "I won't." For a moment, the two women stood in silence. One carrying the weight of power, the other learning what courage looked like. Outside the office windows, the city stretched endlessly, glass towers glittering in the morning sun. Somewhere out there, meetings were being held, statements drafted, deals whispered. But inside Ether Dynamics, there was peace, not of victory, but of clarity. Leona turned back to her desk, scanning the latest headlines. Hallstrom Airline stock plunges 22%. Industry leaders praise CEO Leona Harris for standing her ground. New partnerships imminent for Ether Dynamics. She closed the window, uninterested in the noise. The world saw her as the woman who took down an empire. But she knew better. She hadn't destroyed anything. She had exposed what was already crumbling. When the phone buzzed again, she didn't reach for it. Instead, she looked at Taylor and said, "Let them wait. Some opportunities deserve silence before they hear your price." Taylor smiled faintly. "You think they'll keep calling?" "Oh, they'll call," Leona said, her eyes glinting. "The question is, Will they listen? Because power without compassion was just another hierarchy waiting to fall. And that day, in her quiet office overlooking a shaken industry, Leona Harris didn't feel like a woman who'd lost a deal. She felt like a woman who had rewritten the terms. The fallout didn't end with Hallstrom Airlines. It spread quietly, like truth does when it's no longer containable. Within a week, major corporations began issuing statements of their own, not out of solidarity, but self-preservation. Airlines across the U.S. suddenly reaffirmed their commitment to equality, announcing new diversity task forces, revised passenger conduct guidelines, and empathy training for staff. Every company wanted to prove they weren't the next headline. Behind those press releases, though, was fear. Fear of what happened when silence finally had a cost. Hallstrom's internal overhaul started brutally. The two gate agents were suspended indefinitely. Their supervisor was terminated. A vice president was reassigned. But no amount of reshuffling could erase what had already been seen. Employees whispered about it in hallways. They fired the wrong people. Because deep down, everyone knew the problem wasn't just at the gate. It was in the culture that had built it. Leona's name became more than a trending topic. It became a reference point, the example cited in training manuals and corporate boardrooms. Consultants started calling it the Leona Standard, the point at which a company's integrity was measured not by its profits, but by how it treated people without power. News outlets continued dissecting the event. Commentators debated policy, law, and ethics, but ordinary people were the ones who changed the narrative. Across social media, everyday travelers began sharing their own quiet humiliations. Videos surfaced of passengers being randomly selected too many times, of customers ignored while others were greeted first, of voices dismissed for sounding angry when they were only tired. Each story carried the same undercurrent: exhaustion. The exhaustion of existing in a system that mistook confidence for threat. Leona watched it unfold from her office window. The skyline of San Francisco reflected faintly in the glass. She hadn't intended to start a movement. All she had done was refuse to stay silent. But now, that refusal had become a ripple that touched thousands. She knew that wasn't enough. Words trended, then vanished. What she wanted was permanence, something that couldn't be forgotten with the next headline. And so, Ether Dynamics launched Project Skyline. It wasn't just software. It was accountability, disguised as innovation, an AI platform designed to analyze service data across global companies, identifying bias patterns in real time. It could flag inconsistencies in treatment, recognize disproportionate complaints by demographic, and map where inequity hid behind procedure. In the boardroom, some of her advisors worried it would spark controversy. "You'll be accused of weaponizing data," one said. Leona's answer was simple: then they're afraid of what the data will show. Within 3 months, Project Skyline had contracts with 3 major airports and 2 logistics firms. It wasn't just profitable, it was transformative. For the first time, discrimination could be quantified. Patterns could be seen, not just felt. The same technology that once optimized planes now exposed prejudice. While Ether soared, Hallstrom sank. The company's financial recovery plan failed. Partnerships dissolved. By the next quarterly report, their stock had dropped another 17%. Investors demanded leadership change. The chairman, the same man who once dismissed her story as a misunderstanding, stepped down quietly, citing personal reasons. Publicly, Hallstrom promised reform. Privately, its board whispered about survival. But for Leona, the numbers weren't the victory. The real win was quieter, in the messages she received from strangers who finally felt seen. A teacher from Atlanta wrote, "They dragged you out, but you dragged the truth with you." A flight attendant messaged her anonymously, "We're changing our scripts. Because of you, I stopped before assuming." The movement had grown beyond her control, and that was exactly how she wanted it. When asked in an interview why she never went public with a statement, she replied, "Because statements fade. Systems don't." Her words became the quote of the year. Maya's reflection closed it best. Leona's story wasn't an outlier. It was a mirror. She didn't destroy an airline. She forced an industry to see what it had ignored for too long. And as headlines shifted to new scandals and new causes, one fact remained: a single act of discrimination had exposed the fragility of an empire. They had dragged her from a gate, and she had turned that gate into a doorway. The cemetery sat just outside Detroit, quiet and wind-worn. No cameras, no assistants, no board meetings waiting on her signature. Just rows of names carved into stone, and one she hadn't spoken aloud in months. Leona walked the familiar path with a single white lily in hand, the same flower her mother used to keep on the kitchen table. She wasn't dressed like a CEO today. No power suit, no press-ready polish. Just jeans, a dark coat, and silence. Her father's headstone was simple, just like he'd wanted. Eugene Harris, 1958 to 2012. He fixed what others threw away. Leona smiled faintly. "You'd probably laugh at all this," she murmured. "Your daughter, the headline." She knelt, brushing away a few fallen leaves. The dirt smelled faintly of rain, the kind that made the earth feel alive again. For a long moment she didn't speak. Her fingers traced the edges of his name, the grooves weathered but strong. "You told me," she whispered. "Never let them downgrade your dignity. Not in words, not in rooms, not in lines." Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't stop. "You were right, Dad. They tried to move me like luggage, and I almost let them. But I remembered who I was, and who you raised me to be." She placed the lily at the base of the stone, aligning it perfectly, the way her father always did when tightening bolts on an engine. For the first time in weeks, her body relaxed. The noise, the headlines, the endless calls, they all faded here. What remained was the lesson that built her. Some battles aren't fought for victory. They're fought for memory. She stood slowly, her eyes lifting toward the horizon, faint streaks of orange cutting through gray clouds. Detroit's skyline blinked distantly in the background, a city built on hard hands and harder hope. Leona took a deep breath. "They thought they were dragging me down," she said softly. "They didn't realize they were giving me a platform." And in that stillness, her father's old words came back like a heartbeat. "Fix what others break, but never let them break you." When she turned to leave, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She carried him with her, in her silence, in her strength, in every decision that made the world a little less comfortable for those who thought prejudice could hide in professionalism. The following week, a journalist would write a feature calling her the woman who grounded an industry without raising her voice. But Leona never read it. She didn't need their interpretation. She had lived the truth. He lost billions, she gained a movement. Respect isn't granted at the gate. It's earned in how you leave it. And now to you, the one watching. What would you have done if you were Dr. Leona Harris? Would you have stayed silent to protect the deal, or walked away to protect your worth? Have you ever been told to step aside when you belonged right where you stood? Have you ever swallowed your pride just to be treated fairly? Tell us your story in the comments. Not just what you felt, but what you learned. Because someone reading your words might need the courage to stand where you once did. Like this video if her strength resonated with you. Share it so her story doesn't fade, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, because silence should never be the end of any story. And before you go, one question to carry with you. When they tell you to step aside, will you move quietly, or will you make them remember why you were standing there in the first place?